Africa. Ja! Greetings, kings and queens, brothers and sisters. I'm delighted to be with you today to speak to you about Bristol's journey towards reparatory justice. Many people across Bristol and indeed across the world are joining together to walk the path of racial justice and healing, like those of us gathered here today for African Emancipation Day Reparations Rebellion. It is important to do some deep introspection about how those of us from the African diaspora relate to each other and how those of us and seek to heal from the racial wounds of the past and indeed the present. This healing cannot take place until we connect with others on the path towards reparatory justice. It's no secret that Bristol is recognised as one of the most desirable places to live and work here in the UK. You've just heard Celestine. Look at the kind of talent that we have coming out of our city. We have a very diverse arts and cultural scene that is celebrated, but this is in complete contrast to the experiences of people from the African diaspora in our city who experience greater disadvantage in education, employment, economic prosperity, which has now been further and disproportionately impacted by the virus. Before statues were being toppled, there had been many calls from community activists to move forward the debate on Bristol's role in the transatlantic trafficking in enslaved Africans. The city and its merchants grew rich on the profits of trading in our ancestors, and the call for action was clear. Over recent months, and you will have heard from Sister Cleo, reparations and atonement motions have been debated by a growing number of local authorities around the country. And in March of this year, I'm proud to say that Bristol passed its own reparations motion. The motion was brought forward following a series of dialogue over many years. Predominantly, that dialogue was amongst and between ourselves. But if we are to truly affect change, our conversations have to be much broader than preaching to those of us who are already converted. I have to admit, I was very frustrated in the earlier calls for that motion when it failed in full council. But my view, and that of the Mayor, was that it had to have the full support not only of the council, but of the city and of African heritage communities themselves. No political point scoring. It wasn't about Labour, it wasn't about Green, it was about African people. We need to acknowledge that the debate on reparations needs to be shaped by the whole community, both in terms of the concept, the work that had yet to be done to ready the city for a discussion, and also ensuring that there is shared understanding amongst ourselves and our allies. So Marvin and I put our frustrations into action, and with the support of Brother Kweku, Sister Esther from the Stop The Maangamizi campaign, Sister Jendai representing the African Connections Consortium, African Voices Forum, and also our former Green Party councillor Cleo Lake, the Mayor and I convened a series of very successful citywide conversations on race and reparations. The first conversation was held with Bristol's African heritage communities. That meeting was a huge success. Attended by over 200 people, this first meeting provided the context that had led us to the point we had reached in the reparations conversation, and provided us with an opportunity to acknowledge, account for, and ultimately live up to our responsibilities as citizens to each other as we traverse this journey. At this meeting, we also shared the emerging draft motion and provided an opportunity for our people to comment on and show their support ahead of the March full council. Many of our national and civic institutions were founded upon discrimination and funded by the proceeds of the transatlantic trafficking of enslaved Africans. Facts that can no longer be ignored are now finally being acknowledged by a growing number of Bristol civic institutions, the church, the university, and of course the council itself. So, the second conversation, let's talk about reparatory justice, was held with city institutions. It provided our communities and allies with an opportunity to begin a dialogue in our city and to start an attempt to repair the sins of their past and indeed present. Acknowledging that many of us are on a journey, and I mean all of us. The conversations on reparations have led to confusion by many of us, with the popular view being that it's all about financial compensation. But we all know that it is far more complex than that. The second meeting with allies started to explore the meaning of reparations and the specific UK and international demands for an all-party parliamentary commission of inquiry for truth and reparatory justice. That meeting heard from representatives from those city institutions who benefited from the transatlantic slave trade. We asked speakers from our civic institutions to set out what reparatory justice they were putting in place and to explain why they were doing it. We also wanted to know how they intended to connect with the city's African heritage communities. The toppling of that statue in June was a symbolic demonstration of our city's complex relationship with race. It highlighted the long shadows cast by slavery and racism in Bristol, and how this shapes our city's discourse about inequality and exclusion. Cllr talked to you a little about Project Truth, and I just wanted to give you some background because you need to understand that we were on this journey, as I said, for many years. But in March 2019, I convened a roundtable discussion which was chaired by Bristol's first Professor of History of Slavery, Professor Olivet Otelli. It brought together a wide range of stakeholders from African heritage communities, the voluntary sector, academia, and other interest groups. As a result, we established the Legacy Steering Group with the aim of delivering a permanent legacy and support to projects that explore the city's historic role in the trade of enslaved Africans. The group's progress was hampered by the start of COVID, so we suspended our meetings while we tackled the pandemic in the city. But in June 2020, Black Lives Matter protesters tore down that statue, and the mayor announced the new Bristol History Commission. The Legacy Committee reconvened its meetings in September of last year, and we agreed to support a 6-month period of educational consultations led by Black Southwest Network on behalf of the Legacy Steering Group, with various aspects of all African, Caribbean and continental African communities in all of its diversity, and that work was led by Sister Cllr. The Legacy Steering Group agreed and accepted very early on that if we were going to lead a full and thorough city conversation about what Bristol's legacy should be in relation to this history, then our voices had to be front and centre. Bristol has now and has been for decades at the centre of debate around inequality generally and racial inequality specifically. It stands as a microcosm of the issues of global inequality and the toxic legacies of colonialism and empire. Whether that be the buildings and public statues that came into being out of the economy of empire, the language of propaganda and demonization of the exotic enemy, the continued control of Africa's resources, and the fact that many of today's conflicts in the world are the result of the arbitrary borders created by European empires. Documented differences in opportunity and outcome extend to education, employment and health, resulting in lower living standards, life expectancy and aspiration. Bristol has a history of racial justice activism. responding to injustice as they present at the time. From the Bristol boycott in 1963, the St. Paul's Uprising of 1980, leading to the campaign to establish the Malcolm X Centre. Often forgotten is also the success of the community-based Operation Truth 2007 campaign and its challenge of the abolitionist narrative on the 200th anniversary of the abolition of the Slave Trade Act in 1807 that was felt to marginalise our voices who were living through that period. History isn't reliable. It is the narrative of the powerful. History has many perspectives and memory can be multidimensional. 2020 has altered the context in which we find ourselves. The death of George Floyd, toppled statues, the passing of the reparations motions, conversations amongst ourselves and wider city stakeholders. So now the motion has been passed. What next? Well, Bristol's reparations motion resolved to implement community wealth creation strategies to produce more sustainable and equitable growth whilst alleviating systemic poverty, acknowledging a just economy is the only way to achieve racial justice. As a city, I'm proud to say that we will shortly be making some announcements that aim to readdress the imbalance in funding towards African heritage organisations as a starting point. It also recognises that reparative justice should be driven by our experiences, our voices and perspectives of our communities. And we have begun to center those voices, starting with Project Truth, which brings to the fore and lifts those voices and opinions that have been shunted to the margins of history. Nothing about us without us. This road towards reparations honours and readdresses the silence regarding African ancestors and the diaspora's contribution, both past and present, to wealth and nation building. It is part of reparatory justice process where the past and the present are connected in order to build a just future for posterity. So my brothers and sisters, you've heard all of the other speakers beforehand. It doesn't matter if I'm not getting into the politics of things because personally I think I'm the worst kind of politician. I just want to get stuff done. I just want to change the future. And if it's by stepping up as I have done, then that is what I'm going to do. But personally, I give thanks to each and every one of you that are here today and in our journey towards getting reparatory justice for our ancestors and for those of us here today. So